And this is what people thought about marginalized communities.
What's your understanding of a marginalized community?
Marginalized community. Oh, I love this. A marginalized community is a community that has been ostracized to a certain degree, buffeted in a way that they are no longer allowed access to the resources that traditionally most are entitled to or should be entitled to under an equal and fair democracy, whatever you want to go with. Example, African Americans within most contexts are marginalized, pushed to places like ghettos, not given fair treatment, not given good resources and income. So things like
A marginalized community would be someone that, let's see, a synonym for it. A synonym for marginalized would be groups of people that are sometimes oppressed. So when I think marginalized, I'm thinking people of color. I'm thinking it can be women, it could be immigrants. Generally people from the LGBTQ community, people that are not in the majority of a community.
So basically just a community that doesn't get as much funds and resources as other communities.
Your understanding of a marginalized community?
Marginalized community, I feel, has same similarities in terms of gentrification, where they want to keep a certain type of body of community or a nation in a certain type of community. So I represent the African diaspora, so I feel like I'm marginalized in neighborhoods that only appeal to me and appeal to my culture in terms of what the government portrays.
Marginalized communities tend to have people who are homeless, they live on the street, people in poverty, racialized people, indigenous people, newcomers, refugees, people who have no shelter, living on the streets and they're suffering. This calls for a stop. And now we'll talk about racialized communities. Racialized community is a community that has a certain amount of people in an area who are different races. And today in Canada, we have a lot of those communities. For example, in Brampton, majority of Hindu brown people. In Jane and Finch, there's a majority of Black people. In Woodbridge, there's a majority of Italians. In Markham, there's a majority of Chinese people. In Rexdale, there's a majority of Somalians. And in Richmond Hill, there's a majority of Persian people. And this is what people I interviewed thought about racialized communities.
It would be the same. Persons can be marginalized as a result of race. So racialized communities as well. I've never heard the term, but it could mean communities where you have races which are in particular maybe they predominant in the race, and they live together, because even in our community of Brampton is known to be a racialized community. It's known to be a community of Indians. Woodbridge is known to have Italians. Markham is known for Chinese.
Racialized communities.
My understanding of racialized communities would be a community that is either one race or races mixed, but they're treating each other differently.
Communities.
Racialized community, I guess, depends what that means, but that just means it's a community with various racial groups, and they may be experiencing different things because of their race, good or bad.
In Canada, 1 in 5 racialized families live in poverty compared to the non-racialized people. Racialized women earn an average of 32% less when working in any workplace. Youth who end up experiencing homelessness are more likely to belong to a marginalized and discriminated against group in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. 28.2% of those experiencing homelessness are members of racialized groups compared to the Canadian average of 19.1%. Indigenous peoples make up to only 4.3% of the overall Canadian population but comprise 30.6% of the youth homelessness population. Newcomers and immigrants to Canada also experience difficulties when they arrive. The struggle with finding good quality, permanent, approximately located, yet affordable housing. In Canada, more than 1.67 million people identify themselves as an Aboriginal person. Aboriginal people are the fastest growing population in Canada. They also receive different treatments and are also being ignored. They receive poorer health care, lower levels of education, inadequate housing, crowded living conditions, and they also have a higher death rate amongst children and youth due to unintentional injuries and higher rates of suicide.
I would say that it's Canada that's going to do it, because we ourselves come in and we segregate ourselves into little cliques and little clubs, right? So you'll see some communities, like if you come into Brampton, you'll say, oh, it's an Indian community, but there are a lot of black families, but they stay outside of different, so everybody has put up boundaries. And I don't believe it's Canada, because we haven't embraced this thing of one nation, one community. If we did that, then we wouldn't have this. So people have to stop going, oh, I'm not going over there, too much black people live there. Oh, I'm not going to go there, too much Indian people live there. We must just say, let us go and be one in a community.
Thank you. Is Canada helping?
Communities they're trying to help. No, Canada tend to leave some of the communities behind. And only try to help those who are in the limelight.
Is doing enough to help those communities?
No, because there are a lot of situations regarding communities that no one knows about here in Canada. For instance, I'm doing research in school on First Nation communities, and there are communities even as close to us as Barrie, where people have water that's not drinking water. And people don't know about that, and the fact that Canadian government water management policy doesn't do anything to help people to know that tells me that Canada is not doing its best.
Fast colors and promise.